I always like the things that are obscure about history. I first got interested in history going to Lincoln County and seeing where Billy the Kid had walked, but there's so many people that researched Billy the Kid, there was no way I could compete with them in that. So I look for the obscure things. And horse racing in San Angelo between 1886 and 1896, I suppose I am the world's leading expert. And I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the reason and the person that was critical in this process, and that was Dr. Arnaldo de Leon, who is here with us today. He's one of Texas's great and America's great historians. And I saw a picture in the West Texas collection that started me on this search under the guidance of Dr. de Leon as I worked on a master's degree in history. So with that as sort of introduction, I'd like to start and tell you what I found out. Okay, in the movie Field of Dreams, the line, "If you build it, they will come," haunts Kevin Costner to turn farmland into a baseball diamond. But what if you build it and they don't come? That was the challenge faced by the founders of San Angelo in the late 1880s after they had successfully welcomed a railroad extension to town. The problem was the new railroad was the end of the line, and people only came to San Angelo because that was their final destination. Now, the city fathers wanted more, as did the Galveston investors who had funded much of the railroad line into San Angelo. And so to address the issue, local citizens turned to the sport of kings rather than the national pastime. Now, in addition to the names of early founders and boosters of San Angelo, like DeWitt, Sherwood, Tankersley, Arden, and Tweedy, I would add some other names to the list of the burgeoning frontier town's top boosters and promoters. Those names would include Belle P., Get There, Mamie B., Honest Dollar, Concho, Joe Collins, Viola Bell, Henry Owsley, Hal Fisher, and most importantly, Charlie Wilson. Those were all racehorses who played a pivotal role in San Angelo's emergence as the hub of the Concho Valley between 1886 and 1896. Now, San Angelo had to beg, borrow, and deal just to get a branch railroad line. The Gulf and Colorado and Santa Fe Railroad reached San Angelo on August 7, 1888. Here's how the Fort Worth Gazette described the occasion. San Angelo, the queen of the Conchos, was united by rail with the outer world today at 10 o'clock when the last rail was laid and the construction train sat within corporate limits of town. The Dallas News reported, San Angelo today lost the distinction of being the largest town in the state without a railroad. Sort of interstate comparison there. Since the San Angelo line was a branch line terminus, it didn't enjoy the regular traffic and freight volumes needed to bring down cost. As a local banker, Albert Rose, told the Washington Post, San Angelo is the terminus. The city practically built its extension in order to get the railroad to come to us, but we hardly get the benefits we expected on account of high freight tariffs. Now, concerned Galveston investors, including Morris Lasker, wrote a letter to Tom Green County commissioners recommending that the city put on a major display of the Concho Valley's bounty at the Dallas State Fair to draw folks to town. They promised $300 from the Galveston investors and added, and this is a quote, "It would be a worthy object to increase this fund sufficient to justify the purchase of 100 acres of land in close proximity to your county seat, while land is comparatively cheap for a fairground and race course," end of quote. Now, local boosters decided the Galveston recommendations to promote horse racing was the perfect strategy to draw settlers and investors to town. San Angelo boosterism between 1886 and 1896 actually rode on the back of racehorses, many of them, some homebred and others imported, as they flew around two local tracks and more than 40 other racetracks in over 20 states across the nation. For that strategy to work in San Angelo's development, the town first had to secure the necessary technology. In this case, not only the railroad, but also the telegraph. Second, the community needed successful horsemen and breeders who could represent the town well. San Angelo had 3 of those: Alexander Gardner, Stephen E. Sterrett, and most importantly, John R. Sarge Nasworthy. The last component San Angelo needed was aggressive promoters. The town could boast of 2. J.G. Pat Murphy, the co-editor and co-proprietor of the San Angelo Standard, and Frank Lurch, a local land agent and flamboyant booster with a larcenous touch. Now, I'll get to each, but I will start with the technology. Since the story of the railroad is fairly well known, I'll focus a little more on the telegraph and its arrival. Its importance was equal to that of the railroad. Without it, San Angelo would have remained an isolated West Texas community, lacking a timely connection to the outside world. The telegraph first arrived along the Concho here at Fort Concho itself, thanks to the United States Army in 1875. That was 8 years after the fort was established. The military line ran from Denison here and then on to Fort Stockton, Fort Davis, and El Paso. A military line also stretched east to Fort McCavitt, but those lines served military needs, not the community purposes. So local citizens were anxious to get connected to the Western Union line in Abilene, where the Texas and Pacific Railroad had arrived in 1881. By early 1884, the telegraph company maintained a line into San Angelo, but its service was sporadic and undependable. The Erie Telegraph Company took over the line in the fall of 1884, but the rates were so exorbitant that locals 2 years later considered buying an abandoned 75-mile-long military line between Fort Stockton and Fort Davis, uprooting it and reinstalling it between San Angelo and Abilene. In August of 1888, shortly before the Gulf, Colorado, and Santa Fe Railroad arrived in San Angelo, all of the local lobbying finally paid off when Western Union acquired the Erie line. This takeover broadened the reach of San Angelo through the Western Union's larger network and effectively linked San Angelo with the rest of the nation. This was important in the horse racing because it allowed the dissemination of information about the outcomes of the races throughout the nation. Though Western Union provided more reliable service than its predecessors, its rates too remained exorbitant, at least in the minds of San Angelo locals, until the railroad arrived and brought the Santa Fe Telegraph Company to provide some competition. By early 1892, Western Union had installed a new line from San Angelo to Temple, and at the same time, and this is how fast speed was in communications back then, local telegraph manager F.O. Perry bragged of sending a message to Fort Worth and getting a reply, quote, in just 22 minutes. Now, without a doubt, the telegraph changed San Angelo, but the copper lines that tied the Concho community to the rest of the world remained an imperfect conduit for communications. On the day of the most important event in the history of San Angelo, the day the Gulf of Colorado and Santa Fe announced plans to build an extension from Ballinger into San Angelo, the telegraph provided little immediate help in disseminating the news. No sooner had the glorious news reached town than the line went dead and the telegraph key fell silent for hours. And there are lots of problems with the telegraph that you don't think about today. When the internet is down, you may not know what the problem is. When the telegraph was down, it could be that the lines were down and so forth. There are a variety of reasons for that. One, a lot of cowboys thought it was fun to shoot the insulators off the pole and knock down the lines. That was one thing. Two, it was untreated wood, and so after several years, the wood and the poles would rot, and a high wind could knock a telegraph pole and line down and knock it out of communication. And my favorite was in winter, travelers, sometimes desperate for firewood, would chop down telegraph poles to stay warm for their fires. So it was an interesting, that's the fascinating thing about history, is just those little rabbit holes you can get into like that. Now, with the telegraph, the feats of racers of San Angelo's three major horsemen, Gardner, Sterrett, and Nasworthy, could be shared statewide and even nationally. Now, those three, along with other area horsemen, had established the San Angelo Jockey Club as early as 1885 and built a racetrack outside of town. With the 1889 construction of the Concho Valley Fair Association's racetrack, San Angelo then boasted two major racing ovals. Now, Alexander Gardner typified the horse racer and sportsman of the era. His animals participated in a variety of informal or impromptu contests in San Angelo and neighboring counties, and he imported some of the first blooded horses into the Concho Valley. Gardner owned Poncho and Joe Collins, two foundation sires of the American Quarter Horse, and he also had racers named Annie, Bay Molly, Crawford, Dora, Maud, and Patty. Gardner was more of a local racer whose mounts generally remained in West Texas with occasional forays to the Dallas Fair. Now, Stephen Sterrett, he started out as a Concho Valley rancher owning a 5,500-acre spread at the head of the Middle Concho, and then moving into banking and becoming one of the largest landowners in the area. His modest fortune funded his passion for horses. Sterrett went out of state to acquire horses and ultimately raced extensively on tracks beyond Texas. Early in his San Angelo career, he acquired the thoroughbred Buck Walton, brought him to Tom Green County, and eventually sold him to John Nasworthy, who used him as a stud for years. Now, Buck Walton became the most prolific sire in the history of the region. By the fall of 1885, Sterrett was president of the San Angelo Jockey Club and offered to race Buck Walton against any horse in the county for $500 at a distance of 1 mile. Now, additionally, Sterrett traveled to Lexington, Kentucky in the spring of 1890 and returned with 9 thoroughbreds, including Henry Owsley, Belle P., and Viola P., all one-year-olds that would go on to bring Sterrett some of his best racing successes. Purchased at an average of $500 a head, the 9 horses made up the largest group of thoroughbreds ever brought to San Angelo. By 1890, Sterrett called his stable Goldadrino. Odd name, I couldn't figure out how he got it. But a year later, he took his horses on the Midwest racing circuit. For the first time, he had changed it to San Angelo Stables, which helped give the San Angelo broader recognition. His other racers included Annie Rooney, no relation to Andy, Blake Moore, La Paloma, Leela, Mary L., May Blossom, Ranger, Rondo, Rose, Ruth, San Angelo, San Patricio, Stranger, Tom Parks, and Up and Down. Now, John R. Sarge Nasworthy joined Sterrett as an officer of the San Angelo Jockey Club when the charter's members of the association elected him their treasurer. Before he abandoned the racing business, Nasworthy proved himself to be the most important breeder and the most successful racer in Tom Green County history. His sires produced greater foals, his racers won more contests on more venues than any other local turf man, and his success helped San Angelo receive some of its first national attention. Though he would be involved in many undertakings before his death, he loved breeding and racing horses most of all. Writing of Nasworthy, Angelo State historian Escall F. Duke wrote that due largely to his influence, horse racing became the most popular sport in the Concho country during the 1880s. When the St. Louis Globe-Democrat profiled the wealthier residents of Tom Green County, the paper estimated that Sarge had a worth of $75,000, the equivalent of $2.6 million in today's money. And the paper noted he made his money in liquor, he'd been a saloon owner, and town property, raises fancy stock, and has a fine breed of horses. His racers included Alice, Bridgeview, Captain, Daisy, Gypsy Queen, Judge Cook, Katie V, Little Buck, Little Sister, Mark, Ned Comer, Pearl Baker, Sarah, Valley Ewing, and Wallpaper. Now, while Nasworthy, Sterrett, and Gardner may have raised the horses that put San Angelo on the map, avid boosters Pat Murphy and Frank Lurch provided the ink that drew attention to the Concho Valley. During his 36 years as editor, co-owner, and publisher of the San Angelo Standard, Murphy relished his role as a promoter of all things San Angelo. In the first issue of the Standard on May 3, 1884, Murphy and his partner, W.A. Guthrie, wrote in their salutatory, "Having faith in the future of this section, our aim and our object is to advertise the great natural advantages of Tom Green County for stock raising, farming, and manufacturing, advantages that only have to be known to be recognized. Feeling sure that when the county of Tom Green and the city of San Angelo attain the growth and take the rank we anticipate, the Standard shall not be without its rewards." Now, Murphy enjoyed horse racing, regularly covered local races, and often reprinted articles from other newspapers listing the results of Concho horses on ovals throughout the nation. When he and Guthrie first split up in 1896, leaving Guthrie alone with the title of both editor and proprietor, horse racing coverage virtually ceased in the columns of the Standard. Now, while Murphy built a reputation as the region's most influential booster, Frank Lurch stood out in the 1880s as the Concho Valley's most flamboyant and perhaps slickest promoter. Between his arrival in San Angelo in 1880 and his sudden departure in 1891, no man, including Pat Murphy, traveled farther, spent more money, organized more activities, courted more railroad companies, or participated in more organizations than did Frank Lurch. He most likely deserved the greatest credit for the arrival of the Gulf Colorado and Santa Fe Railway in September of 1888. After an 1897 fire demolished Pickwick Hall, which was the original convention center for San Angelo, was located where Letty's boot shop is today. When that facility burned, Murphy reminisced about it, saying, talking about the hall's importance and Lurch's railroad promotion. He said, "Silent now are the burning words of Frank Lurch at those rousing meetings when the fathers of the town decided that we must give a kingdom for a railroad." A Prussian immigrant, Lurch came to Texas in 1873 and wound up in San Angelo in 1880. He spent 2 years engaged in surveying before he went into land and insurance sales. His firm became the most active land office in San Angelo, advertising more than 1 million acres for sale in Tom Green and adjoining counties in 1885. He proclaimed, "Tom Green County offers better opportunities than any other county in the state of Texas." Now, once the railroad arrived, Lurch turned his Riverside and Fairview farms into model enterprises to demonstrate the fertility and promise of Tom Green County. By 1889, his 5,000-acre Riverside farm, conveniently situated east of town along the Concho River, boasted 240 acres under cultivation, including 80 acres of cotton, 50 acres of corn. The farm also produced, get ready for it, apples, peaches, cherries, pears, plums, apricots, almonds, nectarines, peas, potatoes, popcorn, turnips, watermelon, tomatoes, onions, beets, grapes, and pumpkins. His Fairview place, a mile northeast of San Angelo, served as his residence and a smaller demonstration farm. At Fairview, he boasted 400 fruit trees, 4,000 grapevines, and all kinds of vegetables, along with 30 acres of oats, 40 of wheat, and 20 of cotton. He planted 25 varieties of roses in 1887 to, quote, "astonish those who believe that this climate is good for nothing else but cactus." His 2-story, $6,000 home, designed by San Angelo architect Oscar Ruffini, was fitted with all the modern conveniences, according to the newspaper. Now, Lurch chaired the Tom Green Immigration Committee and represented the San Angelo Railroad Committee on various visits to Galveston to solicit a railroad. Following one such trip, he returned to San Angelo after selling, according to him, 83 city lots in Galveston and making advertising contracts with the leading daily papers of the time, and amounting to $3,000, including $1,500 with the Dallas News. Now, to promote the region and help attract a railroad, any railroad, he coordinated the Tom Green County exhibit for the 1887 and 1888 Dallas fairs. When San Angelo established its own fair in 1889, Lurch became the first president of the Concho Valley Fair Association. Now, while his flamboyance caught the attention of all, his business practices would one day cost him substantially, leading to his bankruptcy and driving him away from San Angelo just before horse racing reached its peak locally. By 1892, the San Angelo Standard was reporting that Lurch had skipped to Canada, their quote, to avoid his debts. For all of Lurch's activities, his most important one became his interaction with the Galveston investors who poured money into San Angelo and recommended the community build the major racetrack to attract potential investors. Now, the community pitched in and organized the Concho Valley Fair Association, which built a racetrack designed by the same man who built the track at the Dallas Fairgrounds. The best I can determine, that racetrack was where the Cotton Bowl today sits. The Concho Valley Fairgrounds stood 1.5 miles east of the corporate limits of San Angelo and just south of the eventual site of Shannon St. John's Hospital campus at 2018 Pulliam. The remnants of the fairgrounds racetrack are still visible from the air today, surrounded by the fairways of Quicksand Golf Course. If the sun's right when you fly into San Angelo, you can still see it, as Harriet and I have. And Jim Bean, the local photographer, went up and took his airplane and shot some pictures of it. I'll show you later. Now, at 38.5 acres, the track absorbed more than a third of the fairgrounds' 100 total acres. Track facilities on the west side of the course included 208 by 10 foot stalls to accommodate horses and other livestock. On the opposite side of the track stood a grandstand capable of seating 1,000 spectators. A room beneath the seats served as a saloon for race goers. Now, in addition to the racetrack, the association laid out the fairgrounds and encircled it with an 8-foot high, close-fitting, 1 by 6 inch board fence. To accommodate both people and animals, promoters then constructed windmills able to pump water from 2 wells on the site. Organizers placed a ticket office on rollers just outside the gates to handle the anticipated crowd. But lacking money and time to build an exhibit hall, the association made do with 2 oval tents, 85 feet long, 50 feet wide, and 25 feet high for exhibitions. One tent showed furniture and women's handiwork, while the second contained agricultural produce and machinery. By the next year, citizens had raised more than $3,000 to build a 3-story, 45-foot exhibition hall. The octagonal building featured a central rotunda with the first floor devoted to cotton and farm machinery exhibits. The second floor displayed county and community farm displays, and the third floor showcased women's culinary arts and craft work. A flag and staff topped out 70 feet above the ground to crown the exhibition hall. Now, as San Angelo spruced up for the inaugural 1889 Concho Valley Fair, Booster Frank Lurch visited Dallas in early October to drum up excitement and business for the fair. When a Dallas News reporter asked him about, quote, Angelo and the Wild West, Lurch answered, Angelo is booming and budding. The Wild West is a synonym for the past. With our electric lights, national banks, artesian wells, schoolhouses, church spires, and social compact, Angelo is the metropolis of the Southwest. In a few years, the trio will be Dallas, Waco, and San Angelo. Mark the prediction, end quote. To help attendance by Dallas's area residents, Lurch engaged an excursion train to bring visitors to the inaugural fair and also announced that races would be the leading attraction with purses amounting to $5,000, the equivalent of $175,000 today. Now, between the San Angelo Jockey Club and the Concho Valley Fair Association, San Angelo hosted 10 major racing events in the community between 1885 and 1886. The events drew spectators and horsemen from throughout Texas and the Southwest, as well as from distant cities as far away as New York, Boston, New Orleans, Chicago, St. Louis, Denver, and Toronto. Now, during that same period, San Angelo horses raced from New Orleans to Chicago and from New Jersey to San Francisco, spreading the name of San Angelo around the country. The best I can determine, as many as 50 Nasworthy, Sterrett, and Gardner horses raced beyond the Concho Valley. In the process, they garnered publicity and exposure for San Angelo that the community otherwise would never have had. Sterrett's and Nasworthy's horses had the broadest exposure as they raced from coast to coast. So I focused on their runners. Steve Sterrett had 3 racers of note: Belle P., Henry Owsley, and Viola Bell. The red X's just mark there all the locations that they raced. So they went basically from coast to coast. It was amazing to be able to find that. Now then, of Sterrett's horses, Viola Bell raced 41 times from 1891 to 94 in Dallas, Kansas City, Denver, St. Louis, New Orleans, Little Rock, and Memphis. The Kentucky Thoroughbred won 8 races, placed in 5, and came in third 6 more times, finishing in the money 46% of the time. Between 1891 and 1894, Belle P. ran in the money 66% of the time in 57 races, accumulating 16 wins, 10 second-place finishes, and 12 thirds in races in Dallas, Denver, Kansas City, St. Louis, New Orleans, and Little Rock. Sterrett stallion Henry Owsley raced 103 times between 1881 and 1897, winning 15, placing in 20, showing in 10 occasions, with 43% of the races being in the money. Owsley raced in Dallas, Kansas City, St. Louis, Denver, Nashville, New Orleans, Little Rock, Latonia, Kentucky, and New Orleans. Now, Nasworthy's most notable racers were Mamie B., Get There, Honest Dollar, Hal Fisher, and Charlie Wilson. Between 1891 and 1893, Mamie B. finished in the money in 45% of her 97 races, including 18 wins, 12 silver finishes, and 14 bronze medals. The mare ran in Dallas, Kansas City, St. Louis, Louisville, New Orleans, Chicago, Madison, Illinois, and Latonia, Kentucky. Now, in 61 races between 1891 and 1897, Get There won 18, placed 10 times, and showed 6 more times for a 55% in racing wins. Those races occurred in Dallas, San Antonio, Houston, Memphis, St. Louis, Denver, Kansas City, Shreveport, Chicago, New Orleans, and Harlem, Illinois. A percentage point better than Get There, Honest Dollar won 56% of his starts in only 32 races between 1892 and 1895. He won 4, placed second 9 times, and came in third on 5 occasions on tracks in Dallas, Shreveport, Hot Springs, Little Rock, Memphis, and St. Paul, Minnesota. Now, the winningest horse in Concho Valley history was Hal Fisher, named for a Tom Green County attorney. In 7 years between 1889 and 1896, Hal Fisher competed 147 times, winning 45 races, placing in 30 more, and finishing third in 21. He placed in the money in 65% of all of his races, and they occurred in Dallas, Kansas City, St. Louis, Denver, Memphis, Detroit, Stockton, Oakland, San Francisco, and Portland and Salem, Oregon, as well as Anaconda Butte and Helena, Montana. While Hal Fisher was the winningest racer, Charlie Wilson was the most important. Between 1891 and 1897, he finished in the money 54% of his time in races in Dallas, Denver, Kansas City, St. Louis, Washington, D.C., Brighton Beach, St. Paul, Latonia, Kentucky, Sheffield, Indiana, Gloucester, Gutenberg, and Clifton, New Jersey. Charlie Wilson won 38 times, placed second 17 times, and took third another 18 occasions. Now, as the most famous Concho Valley racehorse, Charlie Wilson deserves special attention. And one reason, he's the only one that I have a picture of that I can document is actually him. The stallion was named after a portly and well-liked local bartender. The Standard described as, quote, perhaps the most popular saloon man that San Angelo has ever seen. Almost from the time of his foaling, Charlie Wilson drew attention. Foaled in May of 1889, Charlie Wilson grew into a large stallion. The first newspaper reference to the colt appeared in October of that year when the Standard complimented the Dame Daisy as now 15 years old and on the retired list, but still valuable as a breeder. The paper noted her latest offspring was only 4 months old, quote, yet it might be taken for a yearling, so tall did the colt stand. That anonymous mention of Charlie Wilson would be the first of many times he would be recognized in the coming years by the Standard, which would one day call him the horse with, quote, lightning in its heels. National newspapers would shortly take notice of him as well. Charlie Wilson would ultimately grow 17 hands high and weigh 1,300 pounds, though Nasworthy always considered his best racing weight at 1,205 pounds. On average, quarter horses tended to be between 14 and 15 hands high, while thoroughbreds were generally between 15 and 16 hands high. So Charlie Wilson at 17 hands high was a big horse by any standard. Now, beyond size, his most amazing characteristic was his stride. That's the distance between successive falls of the same foot when the horse is running. Recall Nasworthy, quote, we measured Charlie Wilson's stride and found that he took 27 feet at a jump, end quote. Up until that time, the only horse ever measured with a comparable stride was the Kentucky thoroughbred Longfellow, who in 1971 became the 62nd thoroughbred inducted into the National Museum of Racing Hall of Fame. Now, Charlie Wilson's racing debut came in the San Angelo Jockey Club's first spring race in 1891, losing his inaugural race the first day to Sterrett's Belle P, then earning his first victory the following day in a half-mile dash. Those spring races served as a warm-up for the first major tour of racers from both Nasworthy and Nasworthy's Mesquite stables and Sterrett's San Angelo stables, and marked the prelude to their steeds' first national success in elite and distant cities as Kansas City and St. Louis. By October of 1891 in the Concho Valley Fair, the San Angelo Flyers had proven their mettle on area courses, and supporters anticipated the fall races. The association's directors promoted the equine contest as the best racing ever beheld in West Texas, and in many of the races, a number of home champions will take part. In all, the association sponsored 19 different contests and allowed 2 match races on the track as well. However, nothing on the race card exceeded the anticipation of the race between Charlie Wilson and Stephen Sterrett's Belle P, believed to be the 2 fastest 2-year-olds in the state at that time. Their reputations were such that no other owner placed a horse in their race that the newspaper called the most interesting event of the meeting, even though Charlie Wilson won the half-mile dash easily in a time of 51 1/4 seconds. Now, Charlie Wilson started out the 1892 racing season, the greatest ever in Concho Valley, thanks largely to the overgrown 3-year-old himself at the spring races in the San Angelo Jockey Club that April. He captured his first victory of the year in a 3-furlong dash against 3 competitors. The San Angelo Standard reported he won easily, scarcely having a hair wet with perspiration, while the other horses were in a lather when the jockeys reported to the judges. The next week, Charlie Wilson, along with stablemate Hal Fisher and 4 other Starrett racehorses, left for the St. Louis races. The horses were insured for $100,000 on that train trip. Here's how the Standard described their departure. Here's to Mamie B., Henry Owsley, Belle P., Viola Bell, Hal Fisher, and last but not least, Charlie Wilson, the dearest cargo that ever went over the Santa Fe in a freight car. Leaves today and will include the above passengers bound for St. Louis. After Charlie Wilson picked up a quick victory in St. Louis, Nasworthy's horses went to Denver, where the large 3-year-old would achieve his greatest fame by defeating national record holder and California thoroughbred Geraldine. The race may have resulted from an offer by Nasworthy to race any horse in the world for a purse of $10,000. Geraldine was a nationally known thoroughbred, generally believed to be one of the top runners to come out of California in the 19th century. During her career, she won 68 races and held national records at various times in 3 different distances. By the time of her race against Nasworthy's horse, she may have been past her prime, but she remained one of the fastest horses in the nation and still had record-setting potential. When the race finally occurred, Nasworthy estimated that some 500 Texans had visited Denver just to watch. On June 10, 1892, the chestnut stallion Charlie Wilson lined up against Geraldine, as well as his stablemate Hal Fisher and another horse, Vedette, in the featured race of 5 furlongs. Ridden by jockey Bud Nixon, that's a guess, but I think that's Nixon on the horse there in that picture. Charlie Wilson, quote, shot off like a deer the moment the flag fell and made a runaway race of it, according to the Colorado Sun newspaper. Geraldine started more than a length behind, with the other 2 horses 3 lengths farther back, never to make a race of it. With his 2 horses in the race, Nasworthy later told the newspaper his strategy was to start Charlie Wilson out at a dead run to begin the race, hoping to tire his stallion and Geraldine out in time for Hal Fisher to pass them at the end and pick up the win. Charlie Wilson would have none of that strategy, and he led the entire way. The second encounter between Geraldine and Charles Wilson occurred 2 months later, again at Denver and Overland Park. The field of 6 horses galloped 5 furlongs, with Charlie Wilson and Geraldine breaking into a brief lead before April Fool passed them and, quote, according to the Rocky Mountain News, this is April Fool now, quote, ate up space like a tramp at a free lunch. The joke, though, fell on April Fool, which faded at the end, allowing Geraldine to come in front first at a time of 1 minute and 1.5 seconds. Charlie Wilson crossed the finish line in 4th, but received 3rd when the judges disallowed Caesar, the horse ahead of him. The reason was that he had jostled Charlie Wilson. Caesar's interference may have explained Charlie Wilson's lackluster ending. 9 days later, the 2 horses met again in what would be the rubber match. Geraldine went in as a 2-5 favorite, while Charlie Wilson stood at an 8-1 long shot. When the flag fell, Charlie Wilson bolted to a 2-length lead and set a terrible pace to the last turn, reported the Rocky Mountain News. Here, every eye centered upon the favorite, who was getting the lash. Suddenly, the crowd set up the yell, "Geraldine is beaten." And so it was. Charlie Wilson had maintained a torrid pace for the win, and the queenly animal, as the paper described Geraldine, ran a true race but had to settle for 3rd. Now, Charlie Wilson had beaten Geraldine 2 out of 3 times, sending the hopes of San Angelo inhabitants soaring for the prospect that some Denver horses would enter that fall's Concho Valley Fair races. The victory confirmed the confidence that Tom Green County businessmen had demonstrated in Concho Valley racehorses as early as June 1st of that summer. The week before, 40 businessmen sent a telegram to Denver challenging those Western horsemen to bring their entries to face Hal Fisher and Charlie Wilson in the Concho Valley Fair later that fall. The businessmen offered purses of $5,000 to $10,000 to breeders who would race Charlie in the half mile and Hal in the 5/8 mile contest. The confidence and ensuing euphoria over Charlie Wilson's 2 victories against Geraldine in the greatest races ever to involve a local horse would be short-lived, however. Less than a week later, John Nasworthy sold Charlie Wilson to a New York sportsman, J.B. Evers, for $2,500. I'm still angry at Sarge Nasworthy for selling Charlie. Sorry, folks, but just being honest with you. So San Angelo racing backers never again mustered so much confidence in a native horse. Under Nasworthy's ownership, Charlie Wilson continued in at least 21 recorded races. The oversized chestnut won 13 of those races, plus placed second in 3 more and finished third in 2 additional contests, finishing the money in 85% of those races under Nasworthy's ownership. No other horse in the region could match that productivity in so few races. The sale marked the peak of the horse racing industry in the Concho Valley. Now, even though Nasworthy returned home without Charlie Wilson, local citizens backed by the San Angelo brass band playing Dixie met him at the train station and presented him with a walking cane adorned with 11 miniature silver horseshoes and 2 horseshoe nails to commemorate Charlie Wilson's 13 victories in 1892. This is that cane. Now, within 3 years of receiving the cane, Nasworthy sold all of his racehorses due to changing public opinion and possibly the long-term effects of having joined the First Baptist Church of San Angelo in 1889. I'm Baptist, so I can say that. Of the 50-plus racehorses owned by San Angelo horsemen in the 1890s, Charlie Wilson proved to be the most famous and, sadly enough, the most star-crossed. While John R. Nasworthy may have found religion, Charlie Wilson discovered a racing purgatory, running on some of the shadiest tracks in the country under his new owner. But for all his success, the subsequent owners were accused of rigging odds by holding Charlie Wilson back in some races to increase his odds and their winnings in subsequent races when they let him loose. Even so, he amassed an exceptional record in spite of the factors working against him. Over the course of his racing career under 3 different owners, Charlie Wilson ran in more than 130 races, from San Angelo to race courses outside Minneapolis, Philadelphia, New York City, Chicago, and Kansas City. No one knows, and that's sort of the sad thing about history, what might have been. No one knows for sure how great a horse Charlie Wilson could have been had he had scrupulous ownership his entire career. Though viable for only 10 years, San Angelo's nascent racing industry helped separate San Angelo from its rivals for economic dominance of the Concho Valley. By the mid-1890s, though, local racing dwindled. Multiple factors contributed to the demise. First, the droughts of the late 1880s and 1890s devastated the area economy and the area landscape, making it less appealing to investors and settlers. Second, the Panic of 1893 led to an economic downturn nationally, just as the prolonged drought was easing. Third, public attitudes were changing about frontier institutions like racing, gambling, and drinking. And so while organized racing in Tom Green County lasted just a decade, the exposure those horses gave San Angelo nationally and the investors and settlers they helped attract to the community helped the town not only survive, but also best its rivals for economic dominance of the Concho Valley. Just weeks prior to his death, John Nasworthy gave a final poignant interview with the San Angelo Standard in 1924. He recalled with fondness his horse racing days, saying, "I'm old now, my health is broken, and my teeth are gone, but I still can't picture anything more beautiful than a thoroughbred." Today, Charlie Wilson, like his Tom Green County running mates, is long gone and forgotten. Though San Angelo continues to survive and thrive, horse racing's role in helping develop the community is largely lost to history. The only visible reminder of that vanished era is the skeleton visible from the air of the racetrack built east of town by the Concho Valley Fair Association. And that's the racetrack. That's where it all happened. So I'll be glad to answer any questions. And there were two other racetracks that I've never been able to find. The San Angelo Jockey Club had one, and Nasworthy had one on his property. And I've scanned and looked and tried to find references, but I can't determine exactly where they were. Best I can determine, one of them may have been where San Angelo Stadium is today, but again, that's just speculation on my part. I stole it. Okay. I got it honestly, and in the process of this, I got to meet two of Nasworthy's grandsons, Tom Nasworthy and John Nasworthy. They were cousins, and got to know Tom Nasworthy much better. And Tom would call me sometimes, say, "Hey, come out and let's talk." So I'd go out and talk. And one time, I was holding out a job to him, working at Angelo State, but I'd slip out to go talk to him. And one time he said, "I want you to come, I got something for you." And I'm excited. I'm thinking, okay, maybe he's found some papers that he could share with me. Because I'd asked him about that earlier. He said, "You're just a little bit too late." He said, "Nobody was ever going to be interested in that stuff, so we burned it several years ago." But he had all the horse racing records and stuff at one time. So I go out there, and what he did, he had handmade me a custom pair of spurs. And what was so neat about it, he had made it from iron from the luggage cart that his grandfather had bought from the original railroad station when they were selling them, so he could haul feed around for livestock and stuff. And so Tom had kept that and then just used that, reconditioned. And so I've got a beautiful pair of spurs that he made. So anyway, we got to know him pretty well and stuff like this. And one time I was talking at the Tom Green County Historical Society meeting here at Fort Concho, and talked about his grandfather. And he had told me the story of this cane. And so he and John and their wives, they came to hear the lecture. And when I opened it up for questions, he said, "Would you mind if I said something?" And I said, "No, not at all. I mean, you're an Nasworthy." So he stood up and he explained the story of this cane, and then said, "And I want to give this to someone who appreciates it for what it is." And he walked up the front, handed me this, and he said, "You can do whatever you want with it. You can sell it, you can trash it, you can do anything, but it's yours, however you want. And thanks for all you've done to preserve the memory of my grandfather." So, I mean, I was pretty much speechless at that point. And it's a very nice cane. It was glued together. If you look at it closely, you'll see down here where it's been broken. And Tom explained that his grandfather had been out feeding, he was older, had been out feeding the cows, and a bull charged at him, and he swatted him with this enough to scare the bull off and broke it, but he glued it all back together and stuff. So it's a nice, interesting artifact of San Angelo history.